What would a world devoid of morality look like? I think if we can picture that, if we can understand that, we'll have a better grasp on how we think about morality, how we conceptualize morality, and it will help us figure out what is moral and what is amoral in certain contexts. So what would such a world look like? Very much in analogy to Thomas Nagel's famous formulation of how to define consciousness. He defined conscious phenomena is basically all the phenomena about which you can ask the question, what is it like to be in the specific state or to actualize the specific phenomenon? For example, you can meaningfully ask the question, what is it like to dream? What is it like to see blue? What is it like to strive for something, to have appetite for something? What is it like to think? All of those phenomena you can meaningfully say about and ask the question, what is it like to be actualizing one of those phenomena? Now, oftentimes we don't know why exactly it makes sense to ask the question, but we clearly see that in certain cases it makes sense. Like his famous question, what is it like to be a bat? This question makes sense. Even though we might not know or never know what it's like to be a bat, we understand it's a meaningful question. While the question, what is it like to be a chair? Intuitively, it just doesn't make sense. Or what is it like to be a stone? Right? It would be equally valid to ask the question, wait a minute, what is it like to be a foot of a chair? Right? Or what would it be like to be one particle in a stone? Right? This would be an equally meaningful question as the question, what is it like to be a stone? And even though we can't exactly put our fingers on it, why those questions don't really make sense, and what the assumptions have to be for us to so clearly feel that they are meaningless in this context, we still feel there is an important distinction to be made here. In very analogous matter, we could say a world which would be devoid of morality would be a world in which whatever processes it might contain, nothing ever made a difference to no one. And this is the phrase by which you can define whether you have a world that is devoid of morality or you have a world in which morality somehow plays a role and makes sense. So imagine a world in which nothing ever made a difference to no one. This would be a world in which the concept of morality wouldn't even make sense. Very much in analogy to asking the question, what is it like to be a stone? It doesn't make sense. In the very same way, asking what would be good and what would be bad in this world wouldn't make sense. And I'm assuming that there is really no one to whom anything ever made a difference. Not in this world and not outside of this world looking in other words, right? Looking into the world and to whom it would make a difference whether the world was in state A or in state B. So let's, for example, say there were volcanoes erupting in this world. If to no one it made a difference whether they are erupting or not, this world would be devoid of morality. The concept wouldn't make sense. If to no one observing, imagine you are a super being watching this world. Imagine you are a god and watching this world. If to you as a god it didn't make a difference whether volcanoes were erupting or not, again, it would not be a world that had anything to do with morality or possibly could have the notion of morality carrying along. The moment, however, you have beings in that world to whom something makes a difference, so to whom it makes a difference whether they are, for example, in a state of pain or in a state of striving or not in a state of striving, as soon as you have what Whitehead called appetite, as soon as you have that distinction, the world somehow, magically, becomes one which has a moral aspect to it. Even if we might not fully understand it, suddenly the question, what is good and what is bad to do in this world, makes sense. Before that, it didn't make sense to even ask the question. It was as meaningless as the question, what is it like to be a stone? But the moment you have that distinction, something makes a difference to someone, the question, what is the right thing to do in this world? Or what is a good thing to happen in this world, suddenly makes sense. And almost by definition, since the only thing we introduced here is appetite or interests, striving towards something, Whitehead conceptualized of appetite as something that's not only human, a human form of consciousness, but basically assumed that even in the most simple organisms, which literally when we observe them, we see them fleeing certain states and striving towards other states. They literally move towards the light. They literally move towards that which is nourishing. That movement is not just an observable third-person phenomenon where you can see, oh, the object is moving towards a different object. But that movement is accompanied with a first-person sense and experience of appetite, or what it's like to be in a state of striving. He basically takes this, of course, from the human experience. Since we are manifestations of organismic life as it is out there, we know something about the world by virtue of looking within, by virtue of experiencing what it's like to be an organism, a human organism. We already know something about the non-human, if you want, organisms out there. And we understand something about them, which we wouldn't if we were just to observe them from a third-person perspective. The first-person perspective within us is a source for knowledge about the first-person perspective out there, which is not ours. And even if you might not be d'accord with this, you might think this is a form of animism or a form of projecting human consciousness everywhere into the world. I think still most people will intuitively understand that an organism striving towards something is not the same thing as an object being programmed to move from A to place B. The difference being that the object does it the programmed object does it without any accompanying experience. While with organisms, we obviously see it even with organisms that are close to us, like, for example, not humans, like dogs, cats, and lower forms of animals. We clearly see that their behavior is not only one of pretending and looking like it's striving, but we literally see it as an expression of striving, and we understand what striving or appetite means in these cases. And however far you want to push that, to what is the most simple organism to which you will ascribe that first-person experience of striving, of having appetite towards something. Wherever you want to draw the boundary, to me it really doesn't matter. But the moment you introduce an organism that is capable of this first-person experience, you already have changed the structure of the world in such a way that the question, what is the right thing to do, suddenly starts to make sense. The question then is basically defined by the interests of that organism. If there was just one organism in this world, and the only thing this organism was capable of distinguishing is two states. One state it is striving for, it wants to embrace, it wants to maintain. The other state it tries to avoid. In such a world, it would be by definition clear what is good and what is bad. By definition, good would be maintaining a state that fulfills the interest or the appetite of the organism, and bad would be ignoring the interest of the organism and acting against it. In this world, in this maximally simple world, morality would be very easy to define. The meaning of morality simply would be, moral are those things that maintain, that fulfill the interest of that single one being. Amoral would be those actions which act against the interest of that single being. And this is all that morality would mean in this world. All it would mean as a term, it would not be a reference to some kind of metaphysical being which defines morality, but the explanation of what we mean by morality in this most simple world simply would be that meaningful moral actions, by definition, are those which fulfill the organism's interest. An amoral action is that which ignores the organism's interest. And this is something that you as an observer, you as someone who is looking into this world, can meaningfully distinguish. It's purely a matter of definition. You can clearly distinguish that ignoring the interests of the organism is different from recognizing the interests of the organism. These are two entirely different actions. And however you want to define them, they are clearly distinct. It makes sense to define the action which recognizes the organism's interests as moral because it has many features about morality itself, about what we usually define as being moral or amoral action in our everyday life. It's not we should invent a new term here, because we already have a term, but it's kind of doing already this kind of job that we want from it. It describes something that is very specific about consciousness and very specific about meeting the interests of a creature capable of experience. This is a meaning that is already inherent in the notion of morality. And that's something that even those who define morality in spiritual or in religious terms better would understand, because to them what is defining is the will of God. That which defines morality is the will of God. So in other words, there must be a will. There must be something that is non-physical, but is will-like or appetite-like. And if it didn't exist, so if, for example, to God nothing ever made a difference, and you can really imagine a literal God interpretation here. If to God nothing ever made a difference, the term morality would lose its meaning. For a theistic definition of morality, too, what is crucial is the will of someone to be present in the world. With the difference that for a theistic definition of morality, morality is defined by a single will, right? While in our definition, in the world that we just made up, morality is defined by whatever kind of organism is in this world. That's the meaning of the word morality in this context. And it is just as meaningful as meaningfulness can get. You can't have more morality than that. You can have a more meaningful definition of a word than that, to recognize the distinction between recognizing someone's interests and ignoring those, calling the one thing moral action and calling the other thing amoral action. There is nothing more moral than that world which we already defined here. There's nothing that the word could ever carry more inside of it, or could deliver more by making reference to metaphysical definition, like a metaphysical God. There's nothing new or nothing more foundational that it would ever bring to the table that we didn't already mention by simply making the distinction between a world in which nothing ever makes a difference to no one or to someone, and a world in which suddenly there is appetite, as Whitehead describes it. This is the starting point of any moral definition, any definition of morality. Will. The moment you have will in a world, it has become a world which has an aspect of morality to itself.